One of the great privileges I have as a business advisor and coach is that when people have a new business idea, they often pick up the phone, give me a call, come in for a conversation. I love those conversations. I love the excitement, the fresh energy of that pre-startup business. Sometimes it's somebody going out of business on their own for the first time. Often it's a client of mine who's been successful with their existing business and is now looking at how they can create new products, new businesses, and create that wealth portfolio. Often one of the key conversations comes back to forming some kind of partnership. And I'm not talking structural partnership versus company versus trust kind of things. I'm talking about two or more people deciding to go into business together. And I say there are 8 key questions that you need to ask and get alignment on before you want to go into business. Whether that's a new business, whether that's a business with your spouse, or whether that's bringing people up through the ranks of your business so that they become co-owners, partners in that business. In this week's episode, we're going to focus on the 4 strategic questions. And then next week, we'll talk about the 4 operational questions to encompass all 8 those key questions I recommend when forming a business partnership. The first question may seem really obvious, but it often is overlooked. And that's, what is the commercial vision that each of you have for this business? I'll give you an example of where this worked really well. It's a client of mine who was setting up a new business and was bringing on an additional partner. Now, this was a business opportunity that had a lot of potential, but both of them felt that it was really time limited, that technology was going to catch up with this business idea in the next 5 or 10 years. For them, this was very much about getting in, grabbing a chunk of market share and profiting as much as they could in that time before technology overran. They both agreed that the vision for the business was about $1.5 million in revenue per year. And that was great. That was a big tick on that question to move on to the others. Because can you imagine if one of them thought it was a $1.5 million business and the other thought it was a $15 million business or a $100 million business? Differences in that vision would have led to drastically different decisions in terms of recruitment, marketing, funding, operations. And that business owner, if they were right about it just being a smaller business, would have been completely overwhelmed, and all of that profit that they wanted to achieve wouldn't have been, because they would have been investing for a bigger business that would never have come. You may think it's great if one of the partners has a much, much bigger vision than the others, but in reality that means there's a lack of alignment. You need to get to the source of why there's that confusion. Once you've got clear and aligned commercial vision, the next thing to ask is, what are our cultural values? Again, it ought to go without saying, but it really doesn't in business, that you don't want to form a partnership with someone you don't want to work with. If you wouldn't put your best clients, your greatest relationships in a room one-on-one with that business partner, run 100 miles, because no matter how great the commercial thing might be, if it's not a cultural match, it's not going to work. Have the conversation, remembering that culture is about the experience you're creating within the work environment every single day, not just the one-offs. What are your values and are they aligned? Spend time on this, and this is one where I, as a coach, will often get called in to have the most conversation, because it's a lot easier to have that external facilitator asking some of those tough values-based questions. Now, if you've got that aligned, commercial and cultural, big ticks. The third one is to understand your different leadership styles, your behavioural preferences. Now, let me give you another case study, this time of a business and a business partnership that really didn't work. So we ran them through the behavioural suite that I use, called Sherlaw's Compass, and we identified 2 key differences between these 2 business partners. One of them was quite fast-paced, which meant they were jumping from idea to idea very, very quickly, and that partner was also the higher risk of the 2. Now, in and of itself, that wouldn't cause any problems. It's just something to be aware of and something to have conversations about and manage. The problem in this situation was that he was the majority partner. So he was 90% of shareholding in the business. The other person, who was lower risk, slower paced, was 10% of the business. So really, from a structural control perspective, didn't have a lot of say. Now, thankfully, they had gone through the structure process and hadn't gone all the way down where it was going to be a messy extraction, but that business partnership lasted less than 6 months. because the incoming partner, while they brought a lot of value to the business, was never able to keep up with the fast-paced, high-risk, big decisions that the majority shareholder was making. Not a right or wrong, but the majority shareholder is going to continue to behave as if they're a sole trader. Then it makes partnership very, very difficult where those behavioural preferences are not aligned. And the fourth and final key strategic question when forming a business partnership is understanding from a structural perspective what your different preferences are. And I often talk about income, equity, and control. For you, forming a business partnership, which of those three is most important? Are you looking to get as much income out of this as possible? Is it equity or is it control? And a lot of people, when they're forming a business partnership, conflate equity and control. They think that because they've got 51% of the business, that gives them more control. And in reality, when you understand structural preferences, you can do deals all over the shop such that that doesn't need to be the case. If you really want to keep control, that doesn't mean you need to keep a majority of the equity. You've got to be clear though on which of those, income, equity or control, you want and which is most important to your partners. Because if you all want exactly the same thing, that can cause some friction when it comes to dividing the pie. Let me give you a great example of where I've seen this really work. It was a business where the business owner was a leader in their field, was getting frustrated by the fact that their senior staff would work for him for 5, 8, 10 years, would get upskilled, would themselves become leaders in the field, and then would go and start their own competitor business. Those individuals, the senior leaders that were leaving to start their own business, had shifted their preferences from an income when they first took the job to equity and control, wanting to have their own business. Now, he wasn't in a position, he didn't need to sell them a portion of his existing business, but he saw the opportunity to give them what they needed, which was the equity and the control, without needing them to go and form competition. So he would actually sit down with those senior managers at a time when he realized they were about to go off and start their own business, and he would offer them a business partnership conversation. Imagine if instead of setting up in competition with me, I helped bankroll you to go out there and start your own business. And I gave you 25 or 50% of that business with some benchmarks that allowed you to buy in even more over time. So that you, my senior manager, and your next step of your career can go out there and control your own business without needing to take on all of the risks of a startup. Go out there with my blessing. And then for me, senior business owner, I shift from having this pattern where my senior people are leaving and becoming competitors to starting to create that portfolio of businesses in my industry, each led by very capable, well-trained individuals, and where I retain a portion of that equity. That shift, that conversation changed his worldview and has helped create successful businesses for a number of his staff who on their own, in the absence of that partnership, may not have been as successful. Underlying all of these four questions, commercial vision, cultural values, leadership behaviours and structural preferences, is a need to be very open and honest with your communication. And ultimately, if you don't feel, or if your potential business partner doesn't feel that they can be open about what they want out of this business, then that is going to manifest itself in major issues further down the track. If you can't answer these questions, if you can't even have this conversation up front, the business is not going to work. Save yourself the time. But if you can have that conversation, answer these questions. I'll see you next week to talk about the operational ones, and I wish you all the best for your partnership.